Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got another preseason college football video to look at. And with the expansion to the 12-team playoff, we do have some potential auto locks to make the playoff. Now, obviously, this was never a thing. With the 4-team playoff, you could really only lose one game. Even then, you might be out. I mean, in FSU's case, you lose 0 games and you're still out. But, there was an injury involved in there, whatever. But now, if you're part of a Power 4 conference and you win 10 plus games, I think you're pretty much guaranteed to be in outside of maybe the ACC. It depends if you make your conference championship or not. A 10-3 ACC team that is maybe the runner-up is probably still going to make the playoff as the second team, although you could argue both the Big Ten and the SEC might get 4 or 5 teams in. It could be interesting in terms of that, but generally, if you win 10 games, you're going to make the playoff. There are going to be a lot of Big Ten and SEC teams that will argue even at 9-3, they should still be in the 12-team playoff. It comes down to key wins and scheduling and all of that. But this is a good gauge right here. 10 plus regular season wins, the percent chance each team has of it. And you can see there are 4 teams above 80% chance at 10 regular season wins. Now, if you win 10 games, and you're in the Big Ten, you're in the SEC, you are guaranteed to make the playoff. If Ohio State goes, 10-2 in the regular season and then loses in the Big Ten championship, they will be 10-3 and they will 100% be in the playoff. Same thing with Oregon. Same thing with Georgia. You can see Ohio State basically a 90% chance to win 10 games. Some of that has to do with the lackluster non-conference schedule. If Ohio State faced a big opponent in the non-conference, I think that 89% would go down to like an 82 or an 83. But nonetheless, they are basically a lock to make the playoff. Injuries can happen, I'm sure, but still, we expect Ohio State, with how loaded they are, to be in. Oregon's in a very similar boat. Everyone's going to be predicting them to make the playoff. It's probably going to be Ohio State, Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, which should be a rematch of the Week 5 game in Eugene. And so both of those teams, 87% chance for Oregon. Dillon Gabriel, extreme veteran leadership. Evan Stewart, the transfer star receiver, they've invested a ton. How about this? Notre Dame with an 84% chance to win 10 games. So Notre Dame, obviously an independent. If they go 10-2, are they guaranteed to be in the playoff with this schedule? This is an interesting argument, and this is really something I wanted to look at, a few of these different schedules. So let's take a look at Notre Dame. Their schedule difficulty is 57th. You can see week 1 at Texas A&M. Texas A&M seems to always be the same thing every year. They've got a ridiculous amount of talent, but they can never really put it together. They had the horrible Jimbo Fisher contract. They got rid of him, bought him out. But that week 1 game is going to be huge for Notre Dame at A&M. I don't think that's going to necessarily be a massive win. Like if they go on the road to beat A&M, I don't think A&M is going to finish 10-2 or 9-3, and that's going to be like this huge win. A&M's probably going to finish 8-4, 7-5, 6-6, something like that. But still, week 1 going on the road with Riley Leonard, who barely played last year. I know there's an expectation he's going to be this really good dual threat quarterback, and early in the season last year he's shown promise. But that's a tough game if you are Notre Dame. So I would look at that like right around a 50-50 game. I know people are going to say Notre Dame should win it. But yeah, going on the road, Kyle Field, it is no joke. You do have Northern Illinois at home, the MAC school. That's an obvious win, 99% chance. At Purdue, going on the road to Purdue can be tough. I wonder what time that game starts at. I'm not sure, but it has them at a 93% chance. Miami of Ohio, another MAC school, guaranteed win. Louisville at home. You could make an argument based on last year, but I'm actually down on Louisville this year. I think they're going to lose 4 or 5 games in the ACC. I know a lot of people like them, but not me. So I think they beat Louisville at home. You've got the bye week. You get Stanford at home. Stanford obviously has not been very good. That should be another easy win. At Georgia Tech, maybe a bit of a boring game, but should be another relatively easy win. Neutral site game versus Navy, 98% chance to win another bye week. You get Florida State at home. Florida State replacing a bunch of players. People expecting them to lose 2 or 3 games. Maybe DJ Uiagalelei, we'll see what happens with him. But certainly winnable if you are Notre Dame. Virginia at home, that's basically a guaranteed win. Another neutral site game with another Service Academy and Army. That's another guaranteed win. And then they do finish at USC, which is a rivalry game at the Coliseum. Obviously, it's winnable. We'll see how USC is this year. But in general, if you are Notre Dame, going 10-2 is extremely doable because you look at their three, I guess, big hard games at A&M versus Florida State and at USC. If they go 10-2, I'm guessing they get in. The pressure point will be if they go 9-3. Now, I'm not saying this for sure, but I think if they go 9-3, they're going to be out, honestly. They just don't have the schedule. They're not going to have the big wins if they lose 3 games. But the reason Notre Dame right now, in terms of their chances to make, or excuse me, to win 10 games, the reason it's over 80% is because of their schedule being very easy outside of the top 50, even with the road game at A&M, even with Florida State and at USC. They don't face like a premier guaranteed top 10 team in college football at all. You could make the argument that maybe Florida State will be that, but right now I think Florida State is consensus like outside of the top 10 looking in. So we'll have to see with Notre Dame. It's interesting, 84% chance to win 10 games. That would, I think, guarantee they would make the playoff. Some other teams I wanted to highlight, you do have Penn State sitting at 78% chance. So I think when it comes to predicting the 12-team playoff, you kind of have to have Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia, and Penn State. That's kind of where I draw the line. I know people are down on Penn State, but it's important to understand Penn State is a very consistent program. They always have a strong defense, and if we had the 12-team playoffs starting in 2014, they would have 5 or 6 playoff appearances. Now, I know they've had 0 4-team playoff appearances. That's because, unfortunately, a lot of the years they've just missed it. But I do think Penn State this year will break through and make the 12-team playoff. They get Ohio State at home, and maybe they end up winning that game. Even if they lose that game, there's a big margin of error in the Big Ten. They could go 9-3. They've got a relatively easy non-conference schedule. Week 1 game on the road at West Virginia, very manageable. It's at noon. So I think Penn State, they're not that they're guaranteed to make it, but I do think they will make it. You can see Texas. A lot of people are going to be picking them. Alabama. Those are likely teams. You really can't guarantee it, though, based off of their schedules. Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe, both returning QBs, both Heisman favorites. I get it. How about Kansas State sitting at 53% chance out of the Big 12? We're going to look at Kansas State's schedule. I wanted to see this. And here it is right here. So very easy schedule difficulty. You can see in the upper left, 63rd toughest schedule. They begin with UT Martin. So that's an obvious win, the FCS team. At Tulane, that's actually a tough game. I didn't even know that was a non-conference game. Kansas State at Tulane. That is not a fun game if you're Kansas State. They get Arizona at home. That'll be your typical, Big 12 type shootout, close game. Arizona's going to be good. We know that. At BYU, Oklahoma State. They get a bye, then they're on the road at Colorado, West Virginia versus Kansas at Hughes. See, it's just impossible to predict the Big 12. I seriously can't do it. Like, all of these games, they're not all toss-ups, but so many of these games, like, I could see Kansas State losing to Colorado on the road. I really could. I could see Kansas State losing to West Virginia. I could see Kansas State losing to Iowa State. The Big 12 is just impossible to predict. So when predicting the Big 12, I actually think I'm going to have Kansas winning that conference. I'm not lying, because Kansas has a really good offense. I know their defense is lacking. I know their stadium situation is bad. They're not going to be playing on campus, but I am leaning towards picking Kansas. Taking a look at some of the other teams, Michigan, slightly under 50% chance, the quarterback issues. Another Big 12 team, Utah down there. Missouri sitting at 43% chance. That's a team that I think is going to underperform. A lot of people are going to be predicting Missouri to make the playoff because they do have a relatively easy SEC schedule. People are going to take too much stock into their win over Ohio State when Ohio State really wasn't trying. They were starting a third-string quarterback. Clemson, that's a team with a 41% chance. People are underrating Clemson. There's this false narrative that Dabo Swinney, he doesn't like the portal. That's actually true. He really doesn't like the portal, but Clemson has a very talented roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and they're still recruiting phenomenally well. I like Clemson to make the playoff. Like, if I had to pick 12 teams right now, I would go Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, Kansas, Clemson. I got a lot. And then I'd have to actually look at some of the schedules, but it would be some of those teams. You can see SMU. This is another team I want to talk about. SMU with the 13th best odds to win 10 games the first year in the ACC. So SMU, let's take a look at their schedule. You can see they begin at Nevada. Nevada is notoriously, at least recently, they've been terrible. Right now, Nevada is 120 out of 134, so they're one of the worst teams. Look at the strength of schedule, 67, so a very easy schedule. They get Houston Bishop. I believe that's who it is. An FCS team week 2. That's a guaranteed win. Then they get on a Friday BYU at home. They have three. Wow, they have a lot of home games early in the season. TCU, Florida State at home on a Saturday. I wonder what time that game will be at. It'll depend if SMU is ranked or not. On the road at Louisville, at Stanford, at Duke. Very manageable games, I think. Louisville might be a little bit tougher. The other two should be manageable. Versus Pittsburgh, versus Boston College, should be relatively easy wins. At Virginia, should be another relatively easy win. Versus California. So this is a very easy end of the schedule for SMU. My goodness. And you can understand maybe they could sneak into the ACC championship based off of this schedule. The only really challenge they have, it looks like, is Florida State, and they get them, at home. Maybe you could argue at Louisville, but SMU is a team to watch for sure. When it comes to that schedule, it does look relatively easy. Just taking a look at some other teams. Ole Miss down at a 37% chance. A lot of people love Ole Miss. It's because they're in the SEC. It's because it's just a mosh pit, and technically they're not one of the most talented rosters, even with all the transfer portal players. They got the defensive players, so they're at 16 right now in terms of, regular season, 10 regular season wins, 37% chance. That doesn't surprise me. NC State will be interesting. That's another team out of the ACC I could see making the playoff, but we will see. Miami's down there at 19, A&M. And then another team I wanted to highlight, Kansas, sitting at an 18% chance. We know how much of a mosh pit the Big 12 is. I think Kansas has the most talented offense in that conference. You take a look at Kansas's schedule. They begin with Lindenwood, so that'll be the FCS team, easy win. They got Illinois on the road. That's the second half of a home and home. They should beat Illinois. They crushed them last year at home. They do have UNLV. Should be another easy win. That's going to be at home as well. On the road at West Virginia versus TCU at Arizona State. Those are all manageable games. The West Virginia game is going to be the hardest. Versus Houston, very manageable. On the road at Kansas State. Another bye week. They have 2 bye weeks right in the middle of the season. Iowa State at BYU versus Colorado at Baylor. All manageable, but it's very hard. They're all, they could lose any of those games just because of the way the Big 12 is. Schedule difficulty at 61. A lot of these Big 12 teams have easier schedules just because the Big 12 is, kind of a mosh pit of average right now. But I do think Kansas's upside is better in terms of their offensive ability than any other team in the Big 12, and they could be a sneaky team that makes the Big 12 championship and possibly gets into the college football playoff because it is 12 teams now. But right now, when we're talking about teams guaranteed to make the playoff, I think you can basically write it in. Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, and maybe even Notre Dame, but Notre Dame has a little bit less margin for error because they do not have a conference championship, which is really going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them more than it helps them for sure, at least with this 12-team format, because number one, they're not going to get a bye, and number two, if they do go 9-3, it's not like they have a chance to make it up with their conference championship game. And also with this schedule being as easy as it is, I don't think they can really afford to lose 3 games. It would be a fringe. If they're 9-3, it depends. How did they lose the games? What are their analytics? Did they blow teams out? That's what it's going to come down to. You need context if they go 9-3. And also, do they have any key wins? Maybe they lost a bad one in an upset, but they beat Texas A&M. It'll be interesting. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.